just want to flag two things for which my country has become renowned. One is my beloved Prime Minister's speech in Bajletușnad in Romania, in which he cited and talked about his vision for creating an illiberal democracy in Hungary. This speech was, it was picked up by a lot of actors and traveled around the world. The other reason is that Orbán is not only a very successful nationalist leader who has been in power for 7 years now, so he's one of, besides Erdogan, I think one of the longest standing leaders in Europe, for sure. He's also became known for building a fence on the country's southern border. And the reason that that was quite significant is that it entrenched him as a politician of European standing. The three things I want to mention. The first is the fact that Hungary was the first country where the politics of patience, this is a phrase of a good friend of mine, and also an academic, Gábor Scheiring, ended earlier than in many other countries. And I call the politics of patience with the liberal transition of 1989 and the project of transforming a socialist economy into a capitalist one, and erecting the classic foundations of liberal democracy, political institutions. So by 2006, the engines of FDI-led development in Hungary clearly had run out. And that was visible also already in the fact you could see the impact of that on popular opinion. For instance, opinion polls showed a continual decline in support for European membership. So from about a level of 80% in around 2004 when Hungary accessed the EU, by 2006 it was already down to 60-something, and now it's down to below the 50s. So Hungary is one of the countries where this kind of disgruntlement is clearly felt. Now, just to pull the carpet away and say a couple of things about why that is, I did research in rural areas in Hungary, so I'm an anthropologist, I'm a political anthropologist. And rural Hungary has really been hit badly by what we call restructuring. My informants often called it dispossession. That's how they talked about the regime change. But if we look at it from a more formalistic and distant point of view, what's specific about Hungary to some extent, I think it's a qualitative, not a quantitative difference, is that the so-called dual economic model in Hungary has really, I think, emerged in a much more powerful way than elsewhere. So multinational companies had a very, very powerful say over what's happening in the economy and also in politics. And our whole political system was built on actually pacifying and demobilizing the working class that was the main victim of privatization. So we spent a lot of money in the 90s on keeping the workers who lost their jobs, because there was a massive privatization wave, including strategic industrial sectors such as agro-industry, which in Hungary is really important. We're an agrarian country. So the people who lost their jobs were basically and found themselves unemployed had access to pretty high level, at least according to East European standards of benefits. But the state didn't have enough fiscal capacities to sustain this. So that started declining, and there's a number of reasons why fiscal capacity declined, but that had to do with the fact that East European states are competition states. We competed with each other for the workplaces that the German car makers and the French agro-industry, and then I could name a number of other strategic sectors, implanted in Eastern Europe. And there was a downward pressure on wages and very, very low fiscal capacity. So the welfare state that was built by the socialists in my country really was dismantled bit by bit. It didn't allow this pacifization, demobilization strategy to keep going. And that's why in 2006 there was a political explosion before the economic crisis hit anywhere else in Hungary. And that's when the political left started to really disintegrate. So one of the key conditions of possibility for the making of right-wing hegemony in Hungary was a very neoliberal left that fully embraced neoliberalism and massively failed with that project in the eyes of the electorate. When you have that kind of left, you're going to be in serious trouble. We also talked in the Red Room about what that meant in rural areas, and I'm referring to my work, and Nancy Fraser has this, I think, very important phrase of progressive neoliberalism. And I don't want to say too much about this, but I just want to shine the light on how this transpired in rural areas. So at the same time that state capacities were being dismantled because of low fiscal capacity, the left liberal regime was implementing a lot of emancipatory politics. specifically targeting the Roma population, which almost makes up 10% of Hungary's population. And that really went down terribly with rural voters. So at the same time as you're hurting us with your economic policies, you're asking us to make space for gypsy children in our classrooms. We really don't want you to do that anymore. Jobbik, the far-right party, entrenched anti-gypsism as a redemptive discourse for redeeming everyone in the countryside, so redeeming people's hopes. They blamed everything on the local Roma, and that worked very well in dispossessed rural areas. At the same time, Fidesz was transforming itself from a liberal into a populist party. And it was very cleverly tapping into the social anxieties and the feelings of deprivation that were due to what I just talked about, the feelings of dispossession. And Orbán in 2008 had a referendum to protect the National Health Care Service and the national education from being privatized, because that's where the socialists wanted to get money. And that was the turn politically in Hungary, 2008, when the lower middle class and the higher middle class, so the national bourgeoisie and the lower middle class, started supporting Orbán. And other elements of the lower middle class and the workers started supporting Jobbik because of the anti-Roma feelings. He always managed to find external threats and to point the finger at those threats as undermining his political will to deliver on his promises, but also just to keep a certain climate of warfare. It's symbolic warfare, but there is a discourse of Hungary being at war. Literally, there is a discourse of Hungary being at war, mostly against Brussels, because Brussels is trying to impose these refugee quotas on Hungary. So what we're doing, the reason why we're a popular force, says he, is because we're defending Hungarians' democratic rights to oppose Brussels' dictates. And that is a very clever discourse, and it works quite well. Now, the fence just symbolizes this. But it does a bit more, because the fence is also an intervention, besides preventing people from coming. It's also an intervention into the European political public sphere. Because what the discourse that is around the fence is that we're defending Christianity here. Mm-hmm. We're defending European civilization, in other words. So there's basically a redefinition going on of what Europeanness means in a very, very clever way. And actually, I think this fence serves that purpose at least as much as it serves the purpose of keeping people physically out.